السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. خير الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. والشهر أمور محدثاتها كل محدثات بدعة كل بدعة ضلالة كل ضلالة. Truly, all praise is due to Allah. We praise Him and seek His help and forgiveness. We seek refuge with Allah from our soul's evil desires and from all our wrongdoings. He whom Allah guides, no one can misguide. And he whom Allah chooses to lead astray, there is no guidance for him. I bear witness that there is none worthy of worship except Allah, alone without any partners. And I bear witness that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his servant and messenger. Verily the best speech is the speech of Allah, the Quran. And the best guidance is the guidance of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The worst of matters in religion are those invented by people. For every innovation is a bid'ah, a prohibited innovation. And every bid'ah is an act of misguidance that leads to the hellfire. Dear brothers and sisters in Islam, the great Imam Malik ibn Anas ended his Muwatta, his book al-Muwatta, which means like the well-trodden path, with a saying of the Prophet, the hadith, saying that, who related it, saying, I heard the Messenger of Allah say that, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I have been given certain aspects that have been given to no prophets before me. Firstly, I am the last prophet, he said. So we know anyone who comes along and claims to be a prophet, Qadianis, Mormons, the Nation of Islam, whatever, we know that they're lying. So he said, I have been given these things. First of all, the last prophet. Secondly, that the whole world has been made as a masjid for me. We can pray, apart from a couple of dirty places like toilets and sheep pens, we can pray anywhere. That's the basic meaning of it. You don't need a church or a synagogue. They have masjids, and very practical they are. But in the absence of a masjid, you can pray anywhere that's clean. So he said he's the last. And the whole earth has been made a masjid for him. And that the booty of war, the anfal, it's called in Arabic, anfal, what's taken from the enemy after the battle, is lawful for him, because in the Old Testament, the prophets of old, when they went into battle, they would burn the booty. They would burn the property, horses, even they would kill them, and burn the valuables of the enemy. The Prophet ﷺ, it was made lawful for him fourthly, that my enemies fear me. For a month's march, we're talking about marching by feet, or by going by horse. A month's distance from him, the enemies have fear in their hearts. Allah puts fear in the hearts of the kuffar of the Prophet ﷺ, and his ability to punish them for their misdeeds. So this was the nature of the Prophet ﷺ and those who followed him in goodness. We know the story perhaps of Jaysh Zayd, the army of Zayd that went from Medina. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he told Zayd to take all the able-bodied men with him in the army. And people argued against Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, even though he was Caliph, saying, how can we take them all? We need some people to guard Medina. But Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was adamant. And they went forth. And when the Romans saw them, their numbers, they were so afraid that they couldn't fight. And the Romans came to them, miraculous, sent a messenger to Zayd, saying, let's do a deal. We'll give you this gold, clothes, and horses and camels, and if you come back next year, peaceful intent, we'll give you the same. And they dispersed. The Romans dispersed. And the army of Zayd came back to Medina, triumphant, of having achieved their aim of dispersing the army of the Romans, and as well brought vast amounts of wealth with them. And without spilling a single drop of blood. Because the Romans saw the army and they thought, logically, as the military men would think in a logical fashion, that if they have these many fighters to spare, there must be at least as many looking after their capital of Medina. Because obviously no one would march out of the capital unattended. So they thought. So it was easy for Jaysh Zayd. And he became famous for that. It wasn't a battle as such, because no fighting took place. This fear, brothers and sisters in Islam, this fear of Islam and those who follow the Prophet ﷺ in goodness is still in the hearts of the kuffar, despite what we see going on today. We had, the British Muslims, when I was in Britain, some 20 years ago, they were having a TV discussion to which I was invited, but they cut out my bit, so I never appeared. Anyway, never mind. But they said, the interviewer said, you must understand the British people are afraid of you, saying to these Muslims. And this Pakistani professor there, he said, you have an army, and you have weaponry, and even an atomic bomb, and nucleus, and you're afraid of us? How? Does it make sense? But they are. They are afraid of us. And it can be used to good advantage. Because it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who puts that fear in their hearts. It's not us particularly. An ability to fight and an ability to accept death as a possibility. This is common with a lot of people, not just Muslims. You know, the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, 500 of them, they had no more than 500, and they fought the British Army for nearly 20 years in Northern Ireland. And lots of them were caught, lots of them were killed, lots of them imprisoned, lots of them fled. But in the end, the British had to do a deal, the English had to do a deal with them, because they were adamant. And we see, like their leader, Gerry Adams, he's a kaffir, complete kaffir, but his determination and energy and conviction, really, sometimes we should be ashamed of ourselves. You know, the kuffar, how they spend years and years fighting political causes. Mugabe, for example, Robert Mugabe, who's seen as an old man, much maligned in the press, the media. But in his young days, he fought nearly 12 years living in the jungle, and living in the jungle that day is no fun at all. You know, there's no comfort. What did he fight for? Just to get an office, and the top office in the land. So the companions of the Prophet, when they fought, they had these qualities, the ability to fight, and the acceptance of death as a possibility. But for them, they knew that if they won the battle, and they survived the battle, they had good things on this earth, dunya. They would share in the anfal, the sharing of the booty of war, and that they would have the satisfaction of seeing Islam victorious. And if they died, sometimes they preferred that. If they died, they went to paradise. They were promised paradise. So therefore, they were the most tenacious, the most determined, the most convinced of any warriors who ever took to the field. What is our state today? We feel sometimes that we'd like to take part in this struggle against the kuffar. But geographically, politically, militarily, we're prevented. This is not our fault. This is not your fault or my fault as individuals. That we may want to do something and feel we have a strong inclination to do something, but if it is prevented from us. Because after all, we are not rulers. It's like we were saying the other week to one young man here who was, thought it might be a good idea to attack bars and brothels and things like that in this country. But no, we're not responsible for those things. We will not be asked on the day of judgment why alcohol is being sold, or why massage parlors, a euphemism for brothels, are allowed to exist. It's not our responsibility. We didn't order them, and we certainly don't have the means to bring them down. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, mentioned before, من رأى منكم منكرا فليغيره بيده فإن لم يستطع فبلسانه فإن لم يستطع فبقلبه وذلك الأضعاف الإيمان. Meaning that if you see an evil, you change it with your hand. But it means if you're able to, if you have the authority, you find a packet of cigarettes in your son's room, you have the authority to destroy them and to ban him from smoking, tell him this is not to be, stop his allowance, whatever. This is a field over which you have authority. But the nation, we don't have authority over that. So what do? We can speak against it. The sound, the tongue. We speak against it. And if that is prevented, if those in authority come on top of us, like the Muslims in the former Soviet Union, they were not allowed to teach their children how to pray. They were not allowed to teach their children Quran by law. And the children were encouraged to inform on their parents. You know, these places like Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Chechnya, all the places that the satanic Soviets held in their power. And to some extent they still do, of course. They were not allowed to teach their children who is the Prophet. That's a terrible situation. And they were not allowed to leave also. The borders of that Soviet Union, a mouse couldn't get across. They had yards and yards of mines and attack dogs and machine gun towers and electrified fences. They couldn't get out. So, what's the last alternative? You hate it in your heart. You hate the evil in your heart. You can't stop it with your hands? Perhaps. Then you speak about it. You can't speak about it, you hate it in your heart. And the Prophet ﷺ said, after this, there's no faith. It means if you don't hate it in your heart, there's no iman at all left. So this is our situation. But be sure and certain this thing, that what was given to the Prophets of Allah, that the enemies had fear in their hearts of him and of Islam and the armies of Islam, they still have. And all the modern day political maneuverings are to try and remove that fear from their hearts and try and manage their opposition. The Prophet ﷺ was supremely successful, as we know. He was the most successful of all the prophets, that even before his demise, Islam had spread so far, and thousands, hundreds and thousands of people became Muslims. And after his demise, when the Islamic empire passed to Abu Bakr Siddiq and Umar, they were supremely successful. And in the time of Uthman, dissent appeared, and in the time of Ali, we'll be pleased with them both, squabbling and inter-rivalry, fighting between the believers came about by the Qadr of Allah. Still Islam spread. And it spreads still. And it carries on. So this is something to remind ourselves, that the enemies of Islam, they may behave arrogantly, but really they're very frightened. And the Muslims, those whose authority it is, have to see to it that weaker Muslims are protected from the evils of the kuffar, protected from their violence and oppression. It's not our responsibility personally as individual men. We can do nothing except hate it in our hearts and make dua for those poor Muslims who are suffering. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalam ala Rasulil Kareem wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. The Quran tells us, Allah tells us in the Quran, that the worst of enemies to the believers, you will find the worst of enemies of the believers to be the Jews and the idol worshippers. This is Surah Al-Ma'idah, ayah 58 and 59. The quote escapes me at the moment, but at the time when this ayah came down, the Jews were nothing in the world. They were nothing. They had a few tribes living in Medina, and a few here and there, of course, a few in Sham. But they were weak and not at all to be considered as dangerous. We know that the Muslims, under the Prophet ﷺ, routed the Jews of Khutba and the other settlements they had in Medina. Please, brothers, move forward a little bit now. People are coming in. Lots of space there. Some of the Jews were expelled for their treachery, and some were executed. You know the story of Khutba, that the Jews broke their treaty at the time of war. Now, even in modern day political law, the Geneva Convention, any nation that breaches a treaty during a time of war, or individuals who give away information to the enemy, can be executed. Obviously not the whole nation, but you know, the nation are, the responsible people are executed. And it's happened, and it's still one of the things, death penalty now in the West, they say it's barbaric. A man, a devil, murders and rapes a little girl, and they say, no, don't kill him, it's not his fault, you know, his mother took away his lollipop when he was a kid and upset him. And they're sent to prison. But if you give information at a time of war, they will definitely kill you. And also this piracy, robbing their goods, the goods of the very, very, very rich at sea, is also a death penalty. So those successful Somali lads who've been enriching themselves lately, if they're caught, they'll be executed under international law. So the Jews of Khutba, they sided with the Confederates, with the amalgamated Arab tribes that attacked attacked Medina in that war that's called the Battle of the Trench, Khandaq. They had made a treaty with the Prophet ﷺ that we won't fight, but we won't interfere. We'll stay neutral. Did they stay neutral? No. They gave information to the enemy. They sided with the enemy. They even tried to plan a rear attack on the women and children of the Muslims who were put at the end, at the rear of Medina for safety's sake. We know the story about the brave woman who killed the Jewish spy with a spear. The man who was sent to guard was sick, and he couldn't really do anything. So she noticed this Jew on the roof spying out the reinforcements, and she took the spear and killed him. and a very good thing too. So after the battle, when the treachery of the Jews was exposed, that they had been siding with the enemy against the Muslims when they promised not to interfere, they warranted the death sentence. However, the Prophet ﷺ, it's possible that he could have just banished them. The siege was laid at Khaybar, and eventually they took the city. The Muslims took the city. And the Jews asked that one of their friends from the old days, one Arab, be chosen as their judge. And he was also sick or wounded. And he came to Khaybar riding on a donkey. Horses, mules and donkeys are said in the Quran. These are for riding. Imam Malik forbade the eating of them. Because he said in his opinion in the Quran, they're riding beasts. The horse is first class, the mule second class, and the donkey is like the equivalent of a bicycle today. You've got a bicycle. So this Sahabi, he took the judgments from where? From their own book, from the Torah, that when you take a city, all the warriors shall be put to death, and the women and children taken as slaves. It's in their book. They talk about violent Muslims. Their book is shocking. Even some passages they have about killing everything in the city. The suckling babe, the beast of burden. There are some other passages. So this Sahabi, ruled against the Jews, and they were taken out, all the men of them, and executed. And to this day they wail about it sometimes. But the fact is, they deserved it. There's no doubt. Our situation today with the Jews, that they have grown powerful. How have they grown powerful? How did the Jews live amongst the Muslims in Cordoba, in the Uthmani Empire, and all those places, and not cause any trouble? Very simple. They were forbidden to deal in interest. They were allowed to have their shops, their tailor shops and so forth. But generally they're not an agricultural people, they're people of business. They were gold merchants in Europe, diamond merchants, and money lenders. And they lent money at like 50, 60, 80%. And they have in their Talmud, their tafsir of their scholarly opinions, that two Jews could come to a man. One, to lend him money at the time of his difficulty. A farmer has a bad year, he needs to buy seed. The first Jew will lend him money with his land as collateral. Then the second Jew will come and say, you're having trouble with this guy, he's pressing you, I'll lend you some more money. And then they come together and they take his land. And really, brothers and sisters, this is why the Germans hated the Jews. Hitler did have a racial opinion, but the real reason that the people of Europe hated the Jews was because they were moneylenders and robbers. They used to rob people by lending them money and then taking their shop, taking their land, taking their house. That's why they were hated. Really, nobody cared that they had big noses and went oi 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 and stuff like this. Nobody cared about that. So the Jews in the Muslim Empire were forbidden to deal in interest, and it kept them harmless, more or less. As soon as they were allowed to lend money on interest, they become powerful, they become rich, and because they are basically mischievous, they cause mischief, then they can do a lot of evil things when the gold is in their hands, the money is in their hands. And so we've seen. The Jews of America, and there are more Jews in New York than there are in Israel. Just in New York. Dealing in diamonds, dealing in gold, in banking, all these credit card frauds, all the things that they've set up that are causing so much trouble now. That's their ideas, it's their programs. True, it's not only Jews, other people do it as well, but they are the instigators and the controllers of these things. And they always have been. There are some qualities of the Jews that will never change. First of all, their dawah, so-called dawah, is to destroy other religions. They don't want people to join them. They don't want that. That's why they hated Isa alayhi salam. They hated Isa, although he was from their own people, indeed from their priestly class of people. They hated him because he was making all these Gentiles their brothers in faith. They didn't want that. And when they were promised a prophet, and they gathered in Medina for that prophet to come, when they saw that this prophet was an Arab, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and who would make all these Arabs their brothers in faith, they didn't want it. Famous saying of Safiya, the Jewish wife of the Prophet ﷺ, who converted to Islam, when she was a little girl, she said, I was a small child in my father's house, and we heard of this prophet in Mecca. So my father's brother went to Mecca to check him, and I heard their conversation. The uncle said, the father asked the uncle, is he a prophet? And the uncle replied, he is definitely a prophet. See, those whom Allah is angry with because they know the truth and they rebel, they refuse to accept it. So Safiya's father asked, is he a prophet? He said, yes, he's definitely a prophet. And the father asked the uncle, what then should we do? He said, we must fight him to the last. That is their nature. That they know the truth, but they reject it. And the Prophet ﷺ said in the famous hadith, in the tafsir of Surah Al-Fatiha, excuse me, that غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ means the Jews. Allah is angry with them because they know the truth and reject it. وَلَضَالِينَ, those who've gone astray are the Christians, who have manufactured their own religion. So now it bears no resemblance at all to the religion of Islam. We know there are many, many more Arabs. I'm not Arab bashing now, I'm just talking geographically. 300 million Arabs surround 4 million Israelis. But many of them, especially those in power, they feel closer to the Jews than they do to Muslims. They have the same suits, the same shaved faces, the same bank accounts in Geneva. They're the same people. They feel closer to them than they do to radical Muslims, as they call them. They mean people who pray and fast and believe in the Quran. So their armies are blocking system for anyone who wants to harm the Jews, who wants to fight the Jews. So brothers, really there's very little we can do about it except we make dua. And we know that dua, it is the weapon of the believer. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala listens to the dua of the oppressed, even if he's not a Muslim. Somebody makes a prayer, some construction worker, Hindu, he may be a Hindu. We know of one in Dubai, I know of one. He was blinded in an accident. And he didn't get his compensation money. The manager of the construction firm put it in his pocket. And he was sent home blind. So if he prays to God, oh God, curse these people, you can be sure Allah will curse them. So what to speak of the Muslims? If we are making dua to bring down a curse on these Jews, to remove their greed and their arrogance and their cruelty, and punish them in this life and the next, you think Allah will not listen to that? This is the most we can do. This is the most we can do. You can't. In the time of the Prophet ﷺ, your enemy had a sword, you could get a sword. Easy business. Mano a mano, as the Spanish say. Man to man. You have a sword, I have a sword. Who's the strongest? Who's the most skillful? But nowadays it's not like that. We don't have phosphorus bombs. We don't have F-11 fighter planes. We don't have helicopter gunships. We have numbers, and surely, if it started, something could be done. But we're not allowed. We're prevented. So the only recourse, dear brothers and sisters in Islam, the only recourse for those suffering, brothers and sisters of ours in the world today, and it's not only Palestine, we have Chechnya, we have Mindanao, we have many, many places, Kashmir. The only recourse is our dua. And we should not neglect to do it. We should make dua from our hearts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives these people His help and support and puts fear and terror and disaster into the hearts of their enemies. We ask Allah to forgive our sins and to guide us and to have mercy upon us in our shortcomings. We ask Allah to strengthen the hearts of those who are suffering. We ask Allah to make their way easy for them. And should they die, that they be granted paradise. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad ma sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala Ibrahim innaka hamidun majid. Allahumma